Hello, 511. This is Dr. Keisler. I wanted to give you a quick PowerPoint to give you some feedback on your 10 researchable questions assignment that you turned in last week. This week you have to come up with a topic and the most finalized version of your question that you can at this point. So you have to narrow it down to one. So I spent the morning reading through what you guys had already turned in and wanted to give you a little bit of feedback that might help you narrow down your questions and rewrite them. So I clicked through everybody's and I looked at them and I tried to look for trends and kind of what I thought was going on with some of the questions. I know some of the questions you borrowed from one another. You took off the Padlet site, and then some you borrowed from me. So these are just a couple of trends I noticed and things you might want to consider when you're finalizing your question. So the first one was this idea of specificity. So, and I'm not picking on anybody whose questions I pulled off your template. And on the same token, if I didn't pull any off yours, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were all ready to go. So some of them still may have needed work. So, does the Excel reading curriculum increase comprehension among first graders? Are basic skills students enrolled in a book club more likely to use reading comprehension strategies modeled by the instructor than students not enrolled in the book club? And what is the effect of drawing in response to reading with a small group discussion on third grade English language learners' comprehension? So, in terms of specificity, one of the things that you should consider when you're coming up with your question is that you are not going to, and I mentioned this in this week's screencast, you're not actually going to go out and do this study. So you want to write a question that you think can be answered by the existing literature. So in terms of this first question, this might be too specific because you might not be able to find 6 to 10 articles on the Excel reading program. You may, but you may not. And so as you're picking a question this week, you may want to go into the library and query some of your search terms that you think you may use, because you might find, first of all, that there's not enough literature specifically on this Excel reading program, or if some of you picked a specific reading program or a specific intervention you wanted to look at. So outside of, let's say some of the big ones like Open Court, Houghton Mifflin, you'll definitely find stuff on Accelerated Reader if you chose Accelerated Reader. But some of the other ones you may not. So you want to, in terms of specificity, first make sure that there has been enough research done on this particular program, and then you've kind of put in another restriction in this question with first graders. So you may find that there is data on there is literature on Excel, but maybe not all related to first graders. So you don't want to really kind of put yourself in a corner in terms of the amount of articles that you're going to be able to find. One of the things you can do is, if you are looking at a particular program and you want to find out something about that program's efficacy, go, and you have that program, go to the back of it and see what research they cite. So there may be some studies that were done that support that program. The only thing I would say is you can't use those studies if they were done by the publishing company, and not supported by any other outside research. So kind of the same thing with this. So this is a community college reference question, and it's about this book club. So I would just see, since you're not going to go out and do the study yourself, is there enough literature out there that talks about the use of book clubs in relation to comprehension strategies with community college students or with young adult learners? So again, this is another be careful about the specificity type question. I chose this one because quite a few people copied this. I don't remember whose paper it first came from, but quite a few people liked this question. What is the effect of drawing in response to reading with small group discussion on third grade English language learners' reading comprehension? So this had a lot of specifics in it. And again, keeping in mind, if I do a search on this, am I going to be able to find enough articles to help me answer this question? So I think drawing in response to reading was about illustrations. That's what I took from it. So you're looking for somebody, you're looking actually for more than one person. So remember that more than one person or group who's done a study on illustrating in response to reading in small groups with third graders who are also English learners, right? So that's a lot of specifics in one question. So when you're thinking about how I'm going to answer this question, you really need to think about, did enough people do research on here for me to be able to answer that question? This is kind of another trend that I observed, and this is questions that are looking for the answer. So what is the most effective and efficient intervention for students with dyslexia? There's probably going to be more than one, because some of it's going to be specific to age, the types of students, when it's caught. There's a lot of different things to consider there. What are the most effective testing practices to assess learning disabilities in preschool students? So when you write your questions and you want to find out about best practices, think about it in terms of there's probably more than one right answer. Especially in research in the social sciences and education, we really don't narrow things down to like the best way. We prescribe usually a set of best practices that can be used and applied in different contexts. So this question was kind of getting a little more to the idea that there are more than one practices. But when you're thinking about interventions, or you're thinking about instructional strategies, the answer is always going to be there's more than just one. So keep that in mind when you write your question. All right, so wording. Another trend I noticed. So let's take a look at these. How does increased student choice affect student engagement in reading and writing? Does assigning 20 to 30 minutes of independent reading for homework each night improve students' reading ability? Is there a correlation between doing outside reading and taking AP classes? And would preschoolers with inadequate emergent reading skills benefit from literacy interventions? And if so, what are the most important components of that intervention? So when you write your question, one of the things to think about is, do I already know the answer to this? And is my wording kind of limiting what I'm going to be able to find? So kind of like the specificity, but a little bit different. So I can tell you that for this very first one, how does increased student choice affect student engagement in reading and writing? Thinking about, well, the answer is it does affect it, right? So rather than just looking for, it's hard to kind of to quantify sometimes like how the relationship exists, because how is a difficult word. Usually we want to look at, what is the relationship, or does something do this? So how is a really difficult one. So if you find yourself writing a lot of questions with how in it, think about how you can reword those. So how does increased student choice affect student engagement in reading and writing? So kind of, does student choice affect engagement, right? So because the answer is going to be yes, and then kind of the how comes out, because the answer is going to be they write more, or they write more interesting things, or the answer comes out in the explanation, the how comes out in the explanation. So does would be kind of a better way to word that. So then let's look at the next example. So does assigning 20 to 30 minutes of independent reading for homework each night improve students' reading ability? So you can look at this question, and probably without doing the literature search or review, the answer for this one is going to be it depends, right? So if you're thinking about doing a question like this, you might want to change that wording to talk about the relationship between, let's say, what is it that you're looking for in terms of reading ability? And so one of you actually teased this out. So, what's the relationship between daily reading and increased fluency? What is the relationship between reading logs for homework and students reading scores? What's going to be the relationship between reading logs and motivation for reading? So look at your question, and if you think you can already answer it, think about kind of what underlies that, or what am I really trying to get at? Because just in looking at this, you know that the answer is going to be like, it depends, because it depends kind of what you're looking to improve, and it depends on the quality of the text that's selected. But if you expand that idea to exploring the relationship, what you're going to find is that you can then discuss, well, yes, it can improve it if the appropriate text is selected and it's monitored XYZ way, if it happens in this context. And so there's going to be all these kind of confounding factors that influence this question. And so you want to think about, rather than looking just for that yes or no, sometimes you need to explore the in-between, the gray, the relationship. All right, is there a correlation between doing outside reading and taking AP classes? So with a question like this, what's interesting is I might almost ask myself, like, what am I actually trying to figure out? Am I trying to figure out that if kids do more independent reading, are they more likely to take AP classes? Or am I looking to figure out, do students who take AP classes also read independently? I can tell you that the answer is probably going to be yes, there is a correlation, but I don't know that that relationship is significant. Because what you're going to find is that students who read independently and read a lot generally have better vocabularies. They have, they're more motivated to read, and they know more because they read more, and they have more background knowledge, and they have better reading comprehension. And then you're also going to find that students who also have those characteristics are probably more represented in AP classes. But I don't know if those things aren't, that idea again of necessary, not sufficient. So in order to be in an AP class, you probably do outside reading, but because you do outside reading, it's not going to make you necessarily be in an AP class. Does that make sense? Like, so they're related, but I don't know if that correlation is that significant. So if you wanted to look at, what do you want to look at? So do you want to look at independent reading or reading outside of school, or do you want to look at AP classes? And then if you want to talk about the reading piece, what is it that you were looking for when you thought about AP students? Like, what were the characteristics of AP students that you wanted to see if you could link to the independent reading? Was it just, academic performance? Was it reading scores in general? Like, what was that relationship you were looking for? And then if you wanted to look at AP classes, why did you choose outside reading? Like, what were you looking at in terms of characteristics of those types of students? And then this last one, would preschoolers with inadequate emergent reading skills benefit from literacy interventions? And if so, what are the most important components of an intervention? So just looking at that, that's a wordy question, and it's two questions. So look at the first one, and the answer is yes, right? So would preschoolers with inadequate emergent reading skills benefit from a literacy intervention? Absolutely. So I don't even know that question needs to be in there. In the second piece, so then just look, what are the most important components of an early literacy intervention? That's a great question. Or what are components of an effective early literacy intervention, or what are the components of an effective preschool literacy intervention? So all of those would work. All right, I'm gonna run out of time, so pick up on the next screencast.